Well, we are live, and I am excited to be here with Sanjay uh, Kumar from the Future Food Institute, who are our partners for the Food AI Collab. And Sanjay, it's end of 2024. This is the final Food AI Collab of the year, and we have a good one
Yes,
on tap. A good one on tap.
yes.
And
Very excited.
yeah, and before we jump into our conversation with Scott Heimendinger, who, as many of you may know, is a well-known kitchen product inventor, uh, alum of Modernist Cuisine, and lots of other great things, where we'll discuss how he's using AI to help him in his innovation process. I want to spend a little bit of time with you because you also are spending time using AI to help your clients and the community within the Food AI or Future Food Institute. So
Yes.
before we discuss that just a bit, tell people what you do for the Future Food Institute.
Okay. So I am a chef and a food designer, and I'm also the R&D innovation lead at the Future Food Institute. So we have our food innovation lab called Food Alchemist Lab. So, yeah.
That's great. And you help big food companies, small food companies across the spectrum with their innovation and their product development. Is that right?
Yeah. So the Food Alchemist Lab, as I said, we are an innovation lab. We merge food science and gastronomy. So we are working with different people from different backgrounds. So in the lab, you would find me, a chef, food designer. We'd be having nutritionists. We'd be having food technologists, gastro scientists, chefs, designers, even lawyers. So a lot of our focus is on human needs, you can say, finding healthier ways to eat, healthier eating. So we do work for a lot of the big FMCs, but also we work for startups and other helping startups bring in their products as well. So you can kind of say we have this actionable area between what we call the overlap zone between human needs and the planetary needs. That's kind of where we kind of function.
Great. And it's funny, just 10 years ago there was news stories about how it's amazing that IBM is developing this thing called Chef Watson, and they're somehow using AI to create recipes, but now it seems like commonplace. And
So, yeah.
I think you wouldn't be you're a product developer doing your best work if you weren't at least looking at how you can use AI. What ways are you possibly helping your clients in the food space use AI today? What are some of the key application areas?
So for our purpose, so a lot of what we do is kind of speculative. So it's more of creativity, and we're trying to analyze lots of data. So a lot of research papers. We're trying to understand what the market is, what is the drivers of change, what are the opportunities. So you can say at the moment we are using a lot of the AI in finding these data and analyzing these data at the moment. So the creative space is still not an area where at least we have entered into using AI for now.
Excellent. Well, I'm really excited to continue to watch how Future Food Institute, which is an organization I love, leverages AI to help their clients. And I want to get back out to Bologna, where you are sitting, which is one of my favorite places in Italy. Although you guys have I think Future Food Institute has locations everywhere across the world, including Japan and many places within Italy. So hopefully I can see you in person this year or next year. We're already at the end of 2024 and talk more about this. So I'm going to let's bring Scott Heimendinger on stage where we can both say hi to him. Okay. Hey, Scott.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
When I first saw Scott this morning with that t-shirt, I just cracked up because I just love it. And you told me that's a callback to a movie with Val Kilmer, I think, right?
Yeah, Real Genius. It was a very inspirational movie for me, and I'm wearing it to demonstrate my seriousness about innovation this morning.
So serious. Well, that's great. Well, I know Sanjay, you and I were both excited about having Scott on. So do you have, before we launch into our conversation, do you have any things you want to learn from Scott today?
I'm just excited to hear what he has to say. I'm already kind of, I'm a big fan of his modernist cuisine work and everything. So just listening to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Sanjay, talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So Scott, I think the original idea I thought it'd be great to bring you onto the collab and talk about what you're using and how you're using AI in your workflows. We were catching up and you're talking about like your new product you're developing and how you were working on coding because you have a technical background and you do a lot of different things. You're kind of a five tool player, as I like to call them. You do lots of different things, but you actually do your own code. You at least try. And you said you're using AI to basically start and write some of your code, and you obviously get in there and check it out and do some of your coding. But so I thought that was fascinating to me, and you're really accelerating your product development process doing this type of thing.
Yeah, not only being able to move faster, which to any startup is, sort of critical blood, but also it's a significant cost savings. The software and firmware that I'm writing for my product isn't all that complicated in the grand scheme of things. It's not like, this is a software product. It's a piece of hardware that just needs enough firmware to run on it to get the job done. But when I went out to local electrical engineering firms that do firmware development, the best quote that I got back was like $160,000 to do what I considered pretty basic stuff. And that's a huge line item for a startup's cost. So I decided, for better or worse, that I was going to pocket that savings and just write it myself. And thank goodness, AI, or sort of the so-called co-pilots, have really made that process a lot faster than it would have been even just 2 years ago.
So you pocketed that money. Now you're driving around town your new EV Hummer.
Yeah. Let me clarify: the company pocketed that money.
But that. You talked about some of those figures and your time savings, and it's just kind of mind blowing to me. So I thought it'd be great to maybe, if you wanted to share some of the ways in which you're leveraging these tools so other product builders, other inventors, people who are just doing their job in marketing or whatever, can maybe start to think of ways to leverage these tools. I thought that'd be a great interactive session. So that's really it. And so and thinking about this, we talked yesterday, and you said, "Hey, why don't I use this idea where you had this quote on stage about building an AI or Wi-Fi powered rolling pin," which is kind of tongue in cheek, I think, is a way to explain how people oftentimes want to slap the latest product technology onto a product and say, "Hey, let's bring it to market." But it'd be kind of a fun way to maybe explore ways to use your AI, the way you're using AI tools.
Yes. Yeah. I figured if I were going to dive deep into the full life cycle of developing a new product and a new business, I want it to be something that I don't mind if somebody else takes a stab at. I don't want to give away the keys to my own kingdom. But if somebody is really hell bent on bringing a Wi-Fi enabled rolling pin to market, here is your playbook.
Awesome. And what if they make a
So
unicorn? What if they make a unicorn product and $1 billion off of their Wi-Fi rolling pin? Will you be mad?
then please hang my quote in your corporate lobby.
All right. Awesome. So do you want us to show your screen and you can kind of walk us through stuff?
Yeah, go for it. So I thought what I do with the backdrop of my startup idea is I want to create a Wi-Fi rolling pin. We'll walk from basically beginning of manufacturing and all the things that you might need to cover in between in a very abbreviated format as a way of highlighting how AI can be useful for each of these stages of the process, and then places where it's a good idea to call a human expert into the room and not just rely on what the LLM told you. So my plan is to step through this from the very beginning, and we'll hop through and I'll show some of the tools and techniques that I use. I use very similar things for what I do on a daily basis. Of course, going a lot deeper into the nuts and bolts than what we'll cover today, but I hope you'll find it interesting, including some working code that we're going to generate. And so, Mike, please feel free to jump in, interrupt, and re-steer if you have questions.
Sounds great.
So I thought we'd start at the place you normally start, which is you have a great idea in the shower and you want to know if the world has already invented this idea. So you just Google it. So I Googled Wi-Fi rolling pin, and one of the top results is we don't need AI rolling pins. And there's really nothing else out there. So I think that we're safe to proceed. Nothing popped up onto the first page of Google. So what happens as a next step? Well, as a next step, it's generally a good idea to try to understand what the market or marketplace looks like. For my real business, I'm working on something new in knives. The details aren't announced yet, but it's a knife thing. And so I went looking for all the world's knives, especially the ones that bubble up to the top, to try to build a model of how are these things priced and who are the big players and what features and whatever make a difference in price and sales volume and adoption, all that. And the way that I did it, because this was a few years ago, was basically by scraping Amazon and scraping Williams-Sonoma and scraping Sur La Table, which involved writing scripts to go browse these websites. And none of these websites really want you to do that. They've made it really, really hard. But we live in an age of very accessible AI now. So let's see if we can do that easier. So I'll just ask Perplexity here. Perplexity is one of the large language models that is more tightly integrated with the live web. So instead of just searching on what it's been trained on, it can kind of like go out into the world and find answers. And so I'm going to ask for the 50 best-selling rolling pins by their price, material, brand, and features. And in a couple of seconds, it's going to come back not just with the Amazon shopping links, although it does have shopping links at the bottom, but also with a table, which is really cool that we can take the unstructured data of all of these websites and start to tabularize it. But of course, I asked for 50 and it gave me 4. So let's see if it can do a little better. I said, add at least 25 more to the table. And this is, if you've spent any time using these large language models, it's sort of a request followed up by a bunch of nudges. That tends to be the way to get what you want. So it added some more. It doesn't want to commit to pricing on a lot of these, but it did parse out what the material of the rolling pin is, style, brand, things like that. And so then, based on this structured data, you can begin to do a little bit of analysis. So, for example, I want to understand what's considered most premium and sort of what's most expensive. So I can ask things like, what's the average price by material? If you're just browsing Amazon and like noting things down in a spreadsheet on the side, that's a hard question to answer. But here, in a couple of prompts, we make this much easier. And you could take this a lot further by continuing to refine and by style or by length or by weight or by other characteristics to try to get a sense of the way the world is shaped. So this is a pretty powerful tool for researching your competition and the sort of the marketplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And do these tools, like for example, Perplexity, keep a memory? I know that sometimes I could go back in ChatGPT and continue the conversation. I have an account. I actually pay for ChatGPT. I don't know if this is something where like you are building like almost a little kind of tabs and notebooks within it that you can continue to work on.
Yeah, so I should have said up front, I am by no means an AI expert or an expert in these particular tools. I am a daily casual user. I have a ChatGPT subscription as well. Perplexity is actually kind of new to me, so I don't know what its memory is. But I do know that others like ChatGPT, for example, will keep a kind of a contextual memory of stuff that you've been asking it about, and it will use that to refine answers you give it in the future. So these queries do hang out sort of in my history, and I have reason to believe that they influence queries I'll do in the future. But I also find, and we're about to see, that it makes sense to bounce between these tools depending
Yeah.
on the particular task that you're doing, and then of course you're starting over a little bit. Okay, shall we move on from kind of market research here?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so I've determined what pricing looks like, and I think wood is good enough for me. Marble is going to be a little more challenging to integrate electronics into, and wood kind of has that classic look. So we're going to start with a wood rolling pin as our base, but now the goal is to incorporate electronics in it. And here's my big idea for a Wi-Fi enabled rolling pin. The question is, what problem is this trying to solve besides the ability to sell a subscription that goes along with your rolling pin, which makes venture capitalists very happy? I think the problem that I want to solve through the application of technology is, don't you hate it, Mike, when you're rolling out your dough and it's uneven, right? One side is a little lower and the other side is a little higher. And wouldn't you love it if your rolling pin could help you keep a level rolling as you were going? And wouldn't that be a thing you would love to pay $2.99 a month for?
I would definitely pay you that much money. I'd pay double that to get even rolled out pizza dough.
Excellent. Dear Sharks. So that's the brief. That's what we're going to try to build. But I'm gonna pretend, for the sake of this exercise, that I don't know exactly what I need inside the rolling pin to accomplish that scenario. I do know I'm going to need some kind of, microcontroller, main electronic brain. And then I think to indicate that levelness, I want to have some LEDs and I want to have some audible feedback, like a buzzer or something like that. And we definitely want Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. So I'm going to switch over to Gemini 2.0. This is Google's LLM. And I'm going to ask it, I'm going to say, I want to build a Wi-Fi enabled rolling pin. Should be able to detect if you're rolling out your dough level or tilted, provide visual and audible feedback. Should be battery powered, should have Bluetooth. And I'm asking it, what components do I need? Like, what needs to go into this build? And if you didn't have a background in electronics, this would be a really helpful first start before you start spending considerable hourly dollars on an electrical engineer. This is enough to start to get yourself smart on the process and answer some of your own questions quickly and cheaply. So it tells me I'm going to need a microcontroller with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. It recommends ESP32. It's a super popular microcontroller. It's got tons of support out there that passes the smell test. We're going to need an inertial measurement unit. So this is the accelerometer that's going to be able to measure our tilt, and it recommends the MPU 6050. Cool. We're going to need some LEDs, and it's recommending these addressable LEDs, the WS2812s, which are very popular, sometimes called neopixels. Great. We're going to need a piezo buzzer and some battery stuff. Maybe there's an optional user interface, and it recommends some software. We're already off to a great start. But the next thing that I want to do is, okay, I've got these components. Help me understand how they connect together. So I'm going to ask Gemini, can you make me an electrical schematic based on these components? What I really wanted was a drawing, like a real electrical schematic, and it gave me ASCII art. But that's okay, right? It does show how these things are interconnected. I've got a battery that's connected to a charging module. I've got a boost converter to step up. So lithium-ion batteries are a single cell is 3.7 or 3.3 volts typically. We're going to boost that up to 5 volts just in case we need it. And then I've got the brains of the operation here with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, my accelerometer, LEDs, buzzer, and maybe optional buttons or a LED. Okay, cool. We're getting started. The next step that I want to do here is try to prototype this arrangement of components and actually try to make something that works and runs as quickly and cheaply as possible to validate the idea. And you could start ordering these parts and get a breadboard and figure out how to put it together. But we can move even faster than that. So
And
what I'm
just
going
real
to
quick,
do,
Scott, just to
yeah,
clarify, so this is a prototype. It's early stages. You just want to make first version ever, and not making the final like scaled build, which would probably have different components that you work with your contract manufacturer on, etc.
that's right. Yeah. We're still in the early stages of this idea. We want to see something work as quickly and cheaply and experience it to decide if, we want to go raise just $5 million for the Wi-Fi rolling pin, or if we want to go raise a $50 million seed round for the Wi-Fi rolling pin, based on the excellence of the experience.
Got it. And I'm
Yep.
going to ask some of these questions as we go along, just because they're relevant to the moment. But
Sure.
Gennady wants to know, how do you vet the AI outputs for bias and hallucinations in this context? I would imagine that's
Yeah.
important along the way everywhere.
Yes, it absolutely is. Part of the way that I vet these is that I have enough experience to be able to detect within some, domain expertise if the answer I'm getting is sensible or not. You can then sort of ask follow-up questions, especially if you are probing areas that you don't have expertise in, or it's something that's so esoteric. Uh, if you're about to bet the farm on something, you really want to go further and validate that an LLM's output is really, really real. I wouldn't want an LLM to, for example, prepare all my taxes without a little oversight from an expert, because as a general rule, I like to avoid going to jail. The stakes may be a little lower here if we're talking about a few dollars in electrical components, but really, I think gut checks help, and then asking the different models for answers and seeing if they align, that helps. And then trying or taking the next step with what they recommend and seeing, does it work? But hallucinations currently are just part of the world today.
Yeah.
When I'm coding, especially the deeper you get, off of the surface question down into your 12th question in the conversation, sometimes I'll say, "Hey, you wrote me this code. There's a bug here, or it's producing an error. Can you please update it?" And then it'll go like, "I've updated the code with the fix." And I go, "No, you haven't. I'm looking at it right now." Then
Yeah.
please update it again. Okay, sorry about that. I've updated the code and it hasn't made any changes. Usually, if you remind it that it might be hallucinating, that's sort of the kick it needs often to
Hmm.
get in gear and fix something. So just a little tip.
Yeah. That's great. So
Cool.
summary is like, subject matter expertise is also helpful. Get human experts involved when possible. And especially the bigger the tab or the implications from a dollar perspective, make sure you're really kind of double checking. Sandy wants to know, would this process work on service products as opposed to like building a really cool piece of hardware, this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's probably an analogous process, for for service businesses. You've got the tech stack that powers your service, and certainly for work related to that tech stack, these LLMs are quite good. They're they're really good at accelerating the development of technology. But when we're talking about sort of validating your product market fit or figuring out if your onboarding flow is losing customers because it's unintuitive or things like that, there I'm a little more skeptical that these tools are going to solve the problems for you versus old school techniques like watching a person try to do it. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that does. All right. We'll continue with asking more questions as we go along.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Okay, so Gemini has given me some recommendations for components, and it's drawn me a little diagram. But now I'm going to switch over to ChatGPT. I'm a little agnostic about these tools, but also certain tools are better at certain things. And I want to make some code and then arrange a circuit so we can see this thing actually work. So I'm going to take the output from Gemini and feed it into ChatGPT, and I'm going to say, here's my circuit represented here as ASCII art. Can you help me write code for it? And it's going to think for a sec. And here, by the way, although I'm using this little ASCII art circuit diagram, this also works very well if you have proper electrical schematics that you might have found on the internet somewhere, if they're in PDF form, whatever. ChatGPT is really good at reading and understanding those and knowing, like, oh, this pin connects to this pin, and you're talking about this component, and we're going to need these libraries and whatever. So first, it's going through and it's sort of revising the schematic to include some of these connections, like the power out and the connection to the buzzer. This is using I2C connections to communicate with our IMU, the accelerometer, the level sensor, basically. And so it's first constructing that. It explains what it's doing, but it didn't give me what I wanted. Can you write the firmware for this? And we'll see how it performs. But with a little bit of TV magic, I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump back to a previously baked version of this. So I started with the same thing. I just don't want you to watch an LLM spit out text very slowly over the course of the rest of this webinar. So I asked it for code, and it gave me some example code, which looks like this. So this is code that will run on the ESP32, on the microcontroller that it has recommended. It's got the connections here. So that says the LEDs connect on pin 18, the buzzer connects on pin 25, and so on. It's got code to set things up and initialize the accelerometer, and then do some measurements and make some stuff happen. Now, last night, as I was doing this, I went and refined my instructions for the code a little more. So I said, I want to use the LEDs and buzzer sounds to indicate the value of the tilt on the x-axis. So say I don't care about Y or Z because it's going to roll on itself.
Forward and backward, yeah.
That, right? And tilt to the left and right should be represented proportionally by lighting and sound. And I have 4 LEDs total that I plan on putting in this rolling pin, right? So it's okay, below is an example, and here's how this works. And so it's updated the code here. And you can see it says, hey, if the angle of degrees is less than 15, do this. If it's less than 5, do that. And it's setting some pixel colors. And then it explains itself, which is really cool. But it made a mistake. It had the buzzer just kind of like a bzz, bzz, just an on-off. And really what I wanted was the buzzer to play tones, not just buzz, you know, like an alarm clock. And so I asked it for that correction, and it came back and it included some things here. So now if it's less than 15 degrees, the frequency of the tone is going to be here 400 hertz or 600 or 1,000 or 800, depending on where we are there. And it explains itself. I saw a problem here when I tried to run this code. It's using this method called LEDC, which is a method of flashing. I told it about this problem, and it corrected itself again. And so this is pretty normal, this iterative process where you might take this code and actually run it, see what happens, see what errors you get back out, inform ChatGPT or whatever LLM you're using of these errors, and then it gives you a new version. And so we end up with this version, which I was pretty happy with. Now, you could take this and take some actual hardware on your desktop and try to wire everything up and see how it works. But there's this really cool site called Wakwi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that exactly as intended. And it is an online emulator for hardware like this. It's got a bunch of different microcontrollers, and it's got a bunch of different things you can add. LEDs and buttons and displays and rings of these NeoPixels and switches and all kinds of stuff. And it happens to have everything that we need for our project. This is the accelerometer, that it recommended. This is a buzzer. And here I've put 4 LEDs. And because the code that ChatGPT generated told me all the pin numbers for this, so the SCL connection needs to go to pin 21, and so I just wired it up to there, and the SDA needs to go to SDA on 21, CL on 22, and so on. I basically just followed those wiring instructions. And I copy pasted in the code that ChatGPT generated for me. And now, you ready for this?
So excited.
I can hit run. And this is actually running the code that I developed. And I can click on the accelerometer. And now we can, let me move this down so we can see this a little better. And I'm going to pretend that I'm rocking this back and forth. So you can see that when I'm right in the middle, these 2 middle LEDs are green. When I rock to the side, that becomes yellow and it makes this annoying sound. And when I go further to the right, it becomes red. And so
the big lump on the right of my pizza dough will be, the bigger it is, the louder the sound will be in the buzzing.
I appreciate that you are seeing the bigger picture here, Mike. You're seeing the disruptive impact that this technology can have on your pizza dough.
So real quickly, this is fascinating to me. If you had none of these digital tools, say this is 2010, and you have maybe some microcontrollers, you have like Raspberry Pi at this point, you can maybe start to make these consumer hardware products. All this, would you be digging through documentation and PDFs and trying to figure out where to set the pins and all this stuff?
Yes. So I would be like, how to connect ESP32 to an IMU example. And then I would be watching YouTube videos and be digging through these tutorials or forum postings or whatever. And it is just painfully slow to, even if you've got something that is like a tutorial that's laid out like this, it's like step 1, and here's a bunch of whatever, and all this setup you have to do, and it takes such a long time. And that's how I did things for years. I mean, since I started coding now 20 years ago, that's what the process was go find the data sheet, go find the documentation, find their APIs in their repo, figure out what the command names are supposed to be and how they return those things. And this, I mean, I'm going to sound like an old guy to anybody who's sort of just starting out now, but you used to have to like make sure you got all your spelling right or the whole thing wouldn't work. And then Visual Studio and IntelliSense gave you kind of an autocomplete for those things that made it a little easier to understand what variables were supposed to pass to which functions, and gave you the red squiggly lines to understand what was wrong. Now that IntelliSense with Copilot and Visual Studio has gotten much better, so it's like really a full autocomplete. It kind of understands the next line of code you probably want to write completely, and you just hit enter. But this process that I showed that gave me code and that let me adjust the code by speaking naturally to the LLM, it's a really big deal. I'm not and I'm not a. I think there's way too much hype about the capabilities of these things and how much daylight there really is between LLMs and AGI, or the artificial general intelligence that's going to compete with human intelligence. I think, yeah, I think a lot of that, it's
Yeah.
very exciting, but I think a lot of it is overblown. But there is just no denying how much of an acceleration you get in being able to develop code, whether you're an expert moving faster or you're a novice able to learn and iterate much more quickly. This stuff is just like rocket boosters for productivity.
That's great. And I have more questions about that, but I'm going to let you continue as we go on the process.
Sure. So anyway, Walkway is this very cool, totally free service, or freemium or whatever. That's great because you can then plug in some more components, change your code. You don't even have to worry about wiring anything up on the bench. So let's say, for the sake of moving forward our product development process, that I'm happy with this. I say, okay, prototype validated. I want to take the next steps forward into making this my real business. So I need to understand how much it's going to cost me to make this thing. I understand roughly what a rolling pin costs. Now I need electronics costs. So I'm just going to continue this conversation with ChatGPT here and say, can you prepare a bill of materials as a table with designators, so part names, links, and prices? And a few seconds later, it came back with this. So it's telling me, okay, I'm going to need a lithium-ion battery. Here's an example from one that's on Amazon, and here's the pricing. I'm going to need this charger module, and so on. And so it lists out all of these components. Now, this is not a very professional bill of materials. These designators are made up. They don't match something that's on a real electrical schematic. These prices are absurd for real production, right? You do not need an $8 battery for your Wi-Fi rolling pin, and your ESP32 is not going to be a dev board. It's going to be about a $3 chip when you do these things with mass production. But if you didn't know anything about electrical engineering and making products that have circuits in them, this would be such a great head start to then bring to an actual electrical engineer as a way of describing what you want to make. Rather than saying, I want to make a Wi-Fi rolling pin, you say, I want to make a Wi-Fi rolling pin, and I think these components will work. You're already sort of way ahead. You've shortened the communication conversation cycles necessary to get it there. And so now you've kind of got your package ready to go to electrical engineering, which is really great. At this stage, if I were developing something for real, the very next thing that I would want to do, even before I start talking to electrical engineers or any outsiders, is I would want to protect my invention by filing a provisional patent application. So if you're unfamiliar with the way patents work, your patent is your ability to protect your invention so that you have exclusive rights to commercialize whatever is protected and approved in that patent scope for 20 years after filing, I think. But you don't have to go to a full-blown patent right away. Full-blown patents are very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars. You can file what's called a provisional patent first, and that provisional patent can be much lighter weight. It can be just sort of generally what is the idea. And provisional patents are not actually inspected by the patent office until you file your real patent. So it's a lot lighter weight. And by filing a provisional patent, you start a 1-year clock. And by the end of that 1 year, you have to follow up with your full-on patent. And so it's a way to cheaply start your protection without, there may still be details that emerge in that next year of R&D. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT here, help me draft a provisional patent application as we discuss with these features. It's going to think here. And I really appreciate the following text is provided as a template and a starting point. Consult a patent attorney to ensure compliance.
I am not a doctor.
Right. Yes. And I'm very happy to see when I ask, for example, when I ask Gemini the same thing, it's very, it also says I'm an AI. I can't provide legal advice and so on. But it actually, this does a pretty good job at starting out. Patent applications have a particular structure to them. There's a background, there's a summary of the invention, there's a detailed description of the invention that talks about what are sort of the key features, sensing mechanism, blah, 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 blah. And like, honestly, this ain't bad. I'd go give it a little polish. In particular, I'd give it enough polish that somebody reading this in the future would think that a human was involved. There's a whole hot conversation about like, can AIs generate patents and would those patents be valid and who's the inventor and so on. And so I would go apply a little bit of human effort to this. But my God, like, whereas this might have taken an hour, a couple of hours, starting from a blank page, this is really, really wonderful.
And when you're editing it, like putting the pen to it, maybe putting in human language, are you doing it via prompt? Are you putting in like a Word document and tweaking it with your, okay.
Yeah, at this point, I would copy and paste out to a Word document and sort of take it from there. And then very shortly thereafter, get a real human being involved. Now, patent applications include figures, right? They include drawings of the thing that you're trying to make. Those are really important for the examiner to understand, and also for the general public to understand. So I'm going to ask it, can you generate the drawing figures for this application? And sort of slide whistle noise says, no, but here's a text description of the drawings that you want. Okay, like if you were going to outsource your drawings, you were going to have somebody else make them. You could do that. Then I thought, for fun, what if we tried to use the image generator and we plugged in this prompt that it just gave me as the figure to appear in the drawing. And anybody who's played around with these image generators know they take a little bit of finessing, but also the results can be hilariously wrong. Kind of like this. I would put this in the camp of hilariously wrong. So most of our parts are labeled 120. It's got some funky gears and like a scroll on the inside. I don't know what ebniol is, but I don't think I planned on including that in my design. And of course, it's got this like funny like wood carving pattern thing. So this is an area of slightly hilarious fail. However, although I won't show them today, there are other kind of interesting tools that don't just generate 2D images, but now can generate 3D models based on a picture or based on a text prompt or a combination of the two. So suppose you were designing something that really needed a 3D model, or you wanted to have to be able to work on a 3D model to communicate this to designers or to engineers or to other people involved in the project. Now we have the very beginnings of tools that will let you do that, which are really sort of an accelerated start.
That's great. Carlos asked that. Carlos Rodell asked, is using AI tools to work on actual 3D models part of the process now? Do you have one or two you can recommend people to play with?
Let's see. 3D. I looked at some yesterday as I was playing around. Several of them are still you gotta really pay for them.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a whole lot of compute. I think this was the one that I ended up using for just a second. Yeah, this was it. I uploaded a picture of a rolling pin, and it gave me a 3D model of a rolling pin. So this one was Chrome AI. And it let me do some stuff for free, and it was the output was reasonably good, and it also lets you create what's called a textured 3D model. So not just the 3D geometry, but the 3D geometry with the surface color, surface texture applied as an image. So if you were, for example, making assets that you wanted to do renderings from or include in a video game or something like that, that's a really useful way to do this. And this is, from my perspective, I think we're a little ways out from this being a really useful thing for engineering projects, right? Like being able to make CAD models that are actually useful for building something.
Yeah.
But it is going to be a very interesting substitute for buying 3D models off of stock libraries, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
And so you do pay for one or two services. So I think you pay for ChatGPT. How do you make that decision? Because there's a lot out there. You just spend a lot of money.
Yeah. So I pay for ChatGPT and I pay for GitHub Copilot, which is I believe it's actually ChatGPT, a reversion of it in the background because of Microsoft's relationship with OpenAI. I think each of those costs on the order of $20 a month. And I justify that cost easily based on the speed of coding acceleration. Copilot in Visual Studio, there's essentially not a free option. There's like a free trial, but to use it ongoing, you have to pay. And so, given how useful it is for me to do some of this stuff, not in a separate window and then copying and pasting, but in the same window where I'm writing and running and compiling code, is extraordinarily valuable if you're doing any sort of serious software or firmware or even web development coding. So that was an easy yes. And then there are features in paid ChatGPT, like the ability to run lots of queries or to have longer history or access to the newest models, where it's a really long tail of random needs, sort of like I'm discussing here. I don't really use it for image generation, but for lots of the other types of questions, or take some unstructured data and structure it. That's well worth the fairly small dollar cost when I'm thinking about the cost of my time or the cost of accomplishing this a different way in the context of business.
This could go on for 3 hours, so I just want to give people an opportunity to maybe make comments and ask questions. So this is just an interesting one. Aaron says zoo.dev text to CAD is pretty cool for generating models CAD style. So that's a pro tip.
Zoo.dev.
Zoo.dev. Pro tip. So people who want to check that out, play with it. Scott, maybe you could play with it later.
Yeah, awesome.
Craig Stevenson asks, any opinions on Mid-Journey instead of Dolly 3 for ChatGPT for concept image generation?
Yeah, I played with Mid-Journey as well, and I've seen some really astonishing output from Mid-Journey. Again, I am not a deep expert in any of these tools in particular, and my work on a daily basis doesn't involve image generation. The only real AI generated content that I am creating is code or internal documents, like I've got to fill out all these sort of spec sheet lists for the certification process for my product, and it's just an internal facing bureaucratic document that has to get generated. There's a bunch of work. As a personal ethos and as the ethos of my company, I have decided that I don't want to use AI generated content in a customer facing way. So when you see product images or ads, when you see blog posts or marketing copy or whatever, it's actually important to me that that stuff was made by a human, either by real photography or by humans doing rendering, um, under the philosophy that if humans couldn't be bothered to make it, why should you be bothered to pay attention to it?
Yeah.
Not everybody has that philosophy, and that's okay. And there are plenty of places where it's totally fine for that not to be the case. But that's something that's important to me for my product and for my business. And so as a result, I just really haven't. I've only spent time in Midjourney and Dolly and the other, and Sora and video and image generators, whatever, just to kind of mess around or make throwaway content. So I couldn't give recommendations. I think.
Got it. Carlos wants to know, have you used AI agents? I think Copilot, Copilot implies agent. So I think your GitHub Copilot is essentially an agent. It's a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah. The sort of agent based AI revolution seems to just be kicking off. And it's something that I'm very interested in using for automating all sorts of internal tasks and having stuff run behind the scenes for me. I haven't gotten into it yet. I think the closest that I've come is using these sort of advanced reasoning LLM models that will string together a bunch of things to go solve your problem or do self-healing code. But it's something that I think, like, if you've ever used something like Zapier,
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how it's pronounced.
They're called zaps, where you basically
Exactly.
connect different things. Yeah.
That's right. And startups generally have this swimming pool full of services. Oh, I've got Zendesk over here, and I've got QuickBooks over here, and I've got Shopify over here, and I've got this and that and the other thing. And you kind of need a way to like sew all that together. Well, 2 or 3 or 5 years ago, you had to go kind of manually set up and monitor all these connections. But the way the world seems to be headed is you will describe how you want things to connect and things to flow and business processes to be automated. And I'm really looking forward to that. For example, I have in our living room, I have a Vesta board. Are you familiar with that? It's the flat style display, like the Swiss train station cool display things. And they've got an API and for displaying information on the board. And when I open for pre-orders and sales, I want to see new sales come in on the board and have it hear this sort of satisfying click. And before, that might be, an afternoon of coding. And now that's probably just describing what I want.
That's great. And you just basically revealed to the world how exactly nerdy you are, Scott, in that little comment.
It wasn't obvious already.
Yeah. Sanja wants to know, are any tools you suggest for recipe or flavor development? Have you played around with that?
Yeah. So I have poked around there a little bit. And this is an area where I'm a little more pessimistic, a little more of a wet blanket. Anytime I've tried to use LLMs as a brainstorming partner or to help come up with creative answers or ideas for something, I have been roundly disappointed. My experience has been that the answers that it comes back for, like, hey, help me name my company, help me name my product, or come up with a marketing tagline for so and so features. It comes up with the dumbest, most obvious thing, like the quality you would get from somebody who's never done this before but has kind of seen it on TV. Now, maybe these things will get better as time goes on, but I've got pretty strong feelings about how to do creativity. And there's a great John Cleese video that I make everyone who will listen to watch. Just search John Cleese Creativity and Management. It's this awesome half-an-hour lecture, but he talks about how coming up with a new idea or having a creative insight is very much like getting the punchline of a joke. It's connecting two ideas from separate frames of reference in a new way. And when you do that as a joke, that's what makes you laugh, because it was unexpected. You didn't expect to see it coming. And the same is true of coming up with creative solutions for a brand name or a tagline or a new type of recipe. So when LLMs start to write jokes at the same quality as the world's best comedians, that's about when I would expect them to be able to come up with real creative, new, recipe things. Doesn't mean they don't have a role to play. So if I come up with a recipe and I want then to have the nutritional info for it, or to know, like, suggest some gluten-free alternatives or whatever, there absolutely it can lend a helping hand and go search some stuff. But find me the next new hot winter boozy cocktail, I think I'm going to get a pretty dull and expected answer.
All right, we are running out of time. Any final closing thoughts, Scott, or any kind of last minute kind of end of process AI?
Yeah. So just to close out the process here, a next thing that I might do is say, hey, I know what I want to do. I know what I want it to cost. Help me find someone who can help me make this. And this query could also be, help me find a good electrical engineer, help me find a patent attorney, help me find, bookkeepers relevant to my business. And here we'll go back to Perplexity AI as a way of searching the open web that's maybe a little more tailored than just blue links, and this will take you on the rest of your journey. I think the takeaways here are, think of this as putting rocket boosters to accelerate your process. If you have little to no domain experience in the area you're trying to create, this is going to help you get up to speed and understand terminology a lot faster. If you do have expertise in this space, you'll be able to use this to do some of the nitty gritty a lot faster and less expensively than you would. But big picture, if you're a team of one or a very small team and you need to do a broad set of things and there's just not enough hours in the day, really give consideration to how these tools can help accelerate your workflow. But don't think that you are going to just ideate, fundraise, launch, and deliver the next incredible business from half an hour of talking to an AI.
That's not until next year, a year after that.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
This has always been entertaining and fun, Scott. I appreciate you spending your time. I think the audience really enjoyed it. So people are already asking, can we have access to the archives? Craig asked that, and yes, we will have this available to watch. So this has been a lot of fun. I hope to see you maybe soon. And
Yeah.
I think you're gonna have hopefully some news around your product you're building next year.
Yeah. Stay tuned. I'll make a bunch of noise.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Scott.
Cool.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Mike.
And we'll talk to you early next year, hopefully for the next Food AI collab.